Good to speak with everyone again. This is Nate McCoy, and this week I'll be speaking on portfolios as an instructional strategy for our discussion. So jumping right in, just what is a portfolio anyway? Well, I've included two definitions here because I thought they highlighted themes that were coming out in a lot of my research. Collins defines a portfolio as a container of collected evidence for a purpose, and Scholes, a purposeful collection of traditional and non-traditional work that represents a student's learning, progress, and achievement over time. I selected these, as I mentioned, because they highlight common themes throughout the literature that I was looking at. In particular, Scholes' traditional and non-traditional work highlights kind of the variety of evidence that could be included in a portfolio. All of the definitions I looked at included two key points. First, that a portfolio has a purpose. Put in the language of our course, that purpose would be driven by the objective for the course. And second, that it is comprised of evidence, the measurement of that objective. So, if we're looking at a portfolio where the objective is to demonstrate the ability to effectively edit and revise original compositions, then our evidence may consist of multiple drafts of individual essays with various revisions and editing that's occurred. Alternatively, if we're looking to document student learning across the units of a particular class, then in that case we may have pre-selected assignments that are particular to each unit that we're expecting the students to place into that portfolio. And lastly, for those of us who are in the Masters of Adult and Continuing Ed program, I imagine we're familiar with this one, to document student learning across a particular program. So looking at multiple outcomes and selecting evidence and assignments that speak to each of those outcomes across an entire program or degree aim. Shackelford actually includes a taxonomy of various portfolios that I thought was interesting, so I wanted to include that here. First would be a showcase portfolio. And this would be the student's best work. In terms of an example, we could be thinking of an artist's portfolio where their best or highest quality images are included in there. Typically, this is also a little bit of a value judgment because what gets included is based on student reflection and or third-party opinions of the quality of that work. So they may have sought out an instructor's opinion or a family member or someone else to help them choose what the best work may have been. Second, we have descriptive portfolios. A descriptive portfolio is usually work in progress and is a formative feedback tool. So the instructor is monitoring student growth and learning over the course of a time period and involving the students in self-assessing that work and highlighting strategies and interventions where we might be able to go in a slightly different direction to reach a more effective outcome. A portfolio could also be evaluative. This would be demonstration of mastery for specific competencies. So if we're in a program where the learning environment is to involve the use of technology, then perhaps an element of the portfolio is the recording of an MP3 or a podcast, demonstrating that they actually can produce. It's a summative assessment of that particular outcome. Or Shackelford includes a composite portfolio, and this gets defined in a very special way. This would document group work or processes and accomplishments, looking at kind of the entire group process from initiation through to outcome and how that process unfolded. These are typically used in assessment of collaborative groups, whether it's a project group within a course, the entire learning community of a course, or a programmatic composite portfolio such as a self-study for the Higher Learning Commission where you're seeking reaccreditation. In terms of their use as an instructional strategy, Shackelford says that they promote the application of knowledge self-assessment and develop of individual talents, skills, and values. This is particularly true if we're operating in a realm where the student is self-selecting the evidence that's going to go into that portfolio. so they have a high degree of involvement in it. The literature across the board stressed the importance of having reflective components within a portfolio. So it's not just the evidence itself, but involving students in crafting meaning out of that evidence, be it in material speaking about what is to follow, or summative material after a particular portfolio element that speaks to how they arrived at a particular outcome. They are also an active learning strategy. You're requiring students to be involved in the construction of this particular object. So you are getting them to re-engage not only with the assignment itself as they are picking and choosing evidence that will be incorporated into the portfolio, you're also tasking them with revisiting some of the content for the course and attempting to make meaning across those various elements, particularly if it's a portfolio where we're looking at outcomes across a course, or even if it's a smaller portfolio across a particular unit. They do have some specific advantages. They are holistic assessments, so we are not operating in a realm where there are necessarily black and white decisions that can be made. They can offer a measure of student learning growth over a period of time that isn't always available through a standardized measure where there is a yes or no competency involved. They can be used formatively as part of this holistic assessment process in order to diagnose what those additional learning needs are, as I mentioned earlier. So what interventions or strategies is the student in need of in order to reach that more effective outcome. They do engender student engagement. As I mentioned, they are actively involved in the construction process. And they can emphasize the connectedness of content elements as we're transitioning from element to element of the portfolio. And finally, the literature is almost, only call it out, but the literature has a common theme that embedded in it that these support student metacognition, student thinking about their own thinking and making meaning out of the learning process as much as they are making or attempting to make meaning out of the content that they're being exposed to. No instructional strategy is without its challenges, though, and portfolios are no different. There can be ambiguity in terms of student grades. If we think about a portfolio, this is a substantial project, and in many cases a portfolio may represent 50 to 75% of a student's final course grade. Leaving that much open to question, particularly as we get later and later into a course, can make students nervous about what their standing is, and increase the instructor time demands as you're having more and more visits on what should go into the portfolio. They also require careful crafting of what the expectations and requirements are going to be, both in terms of what exactly are we measuring and what are we aiming for as instructors when we use this strategy, but also making sure that our expectations and requirements are being clearly communicated to the students so that they know what we are looking for within the portfolio, what constitutes evidence, and what will be acceptable evidence. As I mentioned when we were talking about ambiguity in terms of the students' grades, this is a substantial project, and substantial time investment is going to be required on the part of the instructor who's using them, both for those building conversations, individual meetings with students, or brief meetings with students during class time that helps guide them toward the portfolio as an outcome, as that final product, but also the grading. We don't assign things for the sake of making students do work. This needs to be assessed. We're measuring student learning in our courses, and assessing a portfolio, which will have multiple pieces of evidence in it, can involve a substantial amount of time in order to give it a fair assessment. The last of the challenges is more kind of an internal or organizational issue, and that's that there can be a perception of less rigorous grading, or that student grades are being inflated on the basis of the portfolio. These are not necessarily standardized evidences, so coming to a yes or no hardline answer on how that is being assessed or the point value that something should be worth can be open to question. Inter-rater reliability, if you're using multiple graders for a portfolio, can be a challenge. Goes back to that careful crafting of expectations and requirements. Having a rubric in place that specifies exactly what basis the portfolio is being assessed on can certainly help protect against this particular challenge of being perceived as less rigorous in terms of assessment. That pretty much covers what I have for you. These next couple slides will be just the references and resources that I use to put together this portfolio. Excuse me, not portfolio, presentation. And I will have these slides hung within the discussion forum as well, so you guys are welcome to download this and take a look at any of the resources that I was using. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all online. Good to speak with everyone again. This is Nate McCoy, and this week I'll be speaking on portfolios as an instructional strategy for our discussion. So jumping right in, just what is a portfolio anyway? Well, I've included two definitions here because I thought they highlighted themes that were coming out in a lot of my research. Collins defines a portfolio as a container of collected evidence for a purpose, and Scholes, a purposeful collection of traditional and non-traditional work that represents a student's learning, progress, and achievement over time. I selected these, as I mentioned, because they highlight common themes throughout the literature that I was looking at. In particular, Scholes' tradition